Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz guitarist Jack DeSalvo. We caught up with him in early August 2020 to talk about his newest CD, Unseen Rain Records, to release a debut recording from Quintrepid coming out during the strange COVID-19 pandemic. Jack started guitar lessons at 8, and by his early teens, he was rehearsing and performing with local rock groups. Art has always been a big part of his life. Sketching and painting were the center of his activities during his early childhood, but it began taking a backseat to music, even though he always felt they emanated from the same impulse. He's got great stories. Enjoy.
Good deal. Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So let's dive right in here as if we needed anything else to probably add on top of what's already going on in the world, especially in America. Probably a hurricane's the last thing we need. But at any rate, interesting times, and that's going to be kind of a part of what I'm going to kind of open up about. You got your new debut album, Unseen Rain. Talk to me a little bit about this release, and especially with it coming out during a pandemic and these very strange times where you can't back it up live.
The two records, the first of our new releases in the latter part of this year, one is that I'm actually part of both of these recordings. The first one is a quintet called Quintrepid, which was recorded in the end of last year. And While We Sleep, which was recorded over a kind of a long period of time, which is a duo between myself and drummer Tom Cabrera. And that record, While We Sleep, the way it was recorded, it was kind of a precursor of how we've been working in the last few months. While We Sleep is actually the fifth duo record with Tom Cabrera and myself. The first one we actually recorded about 25 years ago, and they're all available on Unseen Rain. But this was the first time that we didn't just sit down together and improvise. We're playing mostly compositions that I wrote, and we're overdubbing, kind of creating a band. So besides playing drum set, Tom is playing a lot of Middle Eastern percussion, frame drums, Rick, Dumbek, and I'm playing classical guitar, acoustic guitar, cello, mandola, which is kind of the big sister to the mandolin, and a few other things, and a bass ukulele, fretless bass ukulele. And during this period, the last few months, we've been recording in the same way, except not in the same room. So we've been putting together recordings that will probably be available next year, where one of us will start one or two tracks, send it out to maybe Larry Hutter, bass player, then sends it out to Tom Cabrera, and we all do our parts in trying to react in the moment best as possible. And this has been our only way to work, since we haven't been able to be in the same place.
Yeah, it's just making do with what's going on. Talk to me a little bit about how jazz became your life. Talk to me about your beginnings, growing up, influences, those kinds of things.
Well, I started playing guitar at 8 because when I was 8, on primetime TV was a show called The Monkees. And they seemed to have a tremendous lifestyle where they all lived together, hung out, played. And so that sounded like a good idea to me. So I started taking guitar lessons at 8 years old, learning Beatles songs and all of that. And when I was about 11, I was a complete Beatles fanatic. And I went to a record store, and there was a new John Lennon record, which I assumed was a Beatle record. And I brought it home, and my grandmother lived next door to us, and she had the record player. So I went next door, sat with my grandmother, and put on the new John Lennon record, which was really an experimental record with John and Yoko. And I said, this isn't a Beatle record. Not that I wouldn't appreciate it now. And I brought it back to the store, and I said, okay, pick out whatever you want. And I picked out what I thought was the coolest record cover, and it happened to be a record called Fresh Cream. And the one track on it that really got me was something called Sleepy Time Time, which was a genuine blues, and somehow that really hit me. So I started to follow up on all the connections to that I could through the players in Cream, Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton. Started listening to B.B. King and Live at the Regal, and just completely got into blues. And I went to take lessons from a new teacher. At this point, I'm about 14, and his name was Al Feraldi in New Jersey, and he told me a little fib that was very helpful to me. He said, oh, all the guys you like, they all started on classical guitar. So you have to study classical guitar first. So I did. I'm very glad I did. Around the same time, friends of mine were getting records by this guy named John McLaughlin in the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which I followed that path into what was then the burgeoning fusion scene. And then that brought me to listening to things like Fitch's Brew, Miles Davis, and then going back to older Miles Davis records. And at the time, I was studying classical guitar and studying composition with Ariadne Makeshina, who was a Russian composer. And I had no idea her background was she actually studied directly with Richard Strauss. And so I was studying classical composition in that lineage, but listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra, Miles, got into Coltrane, and wanted to play all these things on guitar. So I had two ways of playing. I was playing classical guitar, and I was playing jazz guitar with a pick. And from there, I went to Berklee College of Music, studied there, got out, moved to New York, started trying to play on the scene there. I started taking some lessons with guitarist Bill Connors in New York City, who was the original guitar player in Chick Corea's Return to Forever, and had at this time recorded a few ECM records. And I had gotten very heavily into listening to ECM records, which sensitized me to beautiful recordings and audio and listening to things for sound as well as music. And Connors had convinced me to not separate the two ways of playing, but to actually try and play improvised music and jazz with my fingers as well. So I started with which is classical technique. So I started integrating that. And I had met bass player Melvin Gibbs, who had been working with Ronald Shannon Jackson in the Decoding Society. Now I'm in my 20s at this point. And I had recorded at that time, a reel-to-reel tape with a bass player named Tony DeChico and drummer Bruce Ditmas. And Bruce Ditmas, by that time, had played with Paul Bley, Gil Evans, Kenny Wheeler. So we had recorded a completely improvised recording and put on cassette, passed it around, and gave one to Melvin Gibbs, who in turn gave it to Ronald Shannon Jackson, who then called me for an audition. And so I went to his rehearsal space, and of course, Ronald Shannon Jackson, or Shannon as we called him, at that time was a veteran of playing with Ornette Coleman and Cecil Taylor and many others, and he had music up on the stand, and I looked at it, and each note had a very strange symbol in front of it, and I thought, oh boy, I guess this is it for me. But then he went up, Shannon went up and played the music on flute, and I realized all these strange symbols are simply natural signs. And each note was written as a whole note, and you just had to kind of follow the trajectory of the melody to get the flow of it. And so we played, and it was at that audition, it was just Shannon, myself, and bass player Ramon Puzer. And we were done with that. Shannon just said, "You have your passport?" And so I began touring with his group at that point, and recorded with him his record Red Warrior. And from that point on, continued playing. Also on the side, got into the record business, working on the side for various record companies, which led me to start a record label. Mostly at the time to just put out my own material. I had a bunch of material that was recorded that was not released. And my brother, Jim, passed away last year. He was a recording engineer. And an old friend of mine is also a producer and recording engineer, Gene Gaudette. And together we started Unseen Rain Records. And we decided at the time that it made sense just to release these as downloads. Now, of course, as time went on, we did create some CDs, mostly for promotional purposes, but we did create some CDs, but for the most part, we've been releasing just downloads. Now, just this past year, when my brother passed away, I brought in other partners who were working very close with us anyway, who were essentially musicians who we were working with, which the drummer Tom Cabrera, the vocalist Julie Lyon, and the bass player who's in Orlando, Florida, Larry Hutter. And Larry Hutter is actually a recording engineer as well, who had been working with us. So at this point, we have about 100 releases in the catalog, various artists. Kind of get a new start this year, and we're very excited about what's coming out at the end of this year. The first two records that I mentioned While We Sleep, the duo record, and Quintrepid, which is a quartet, myself on guitar, Tom Cabrera on drums, an incredible bass player, Dmitry Ishenko, double bass player. Everybody here is New York-based. Chris Forbes on piano, and on flugelhorn, the trumpet player, of course, that I believe this is the first commercial recording he's on, but he's really, really a great player, and his name is Matt Lambiase.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, when we do return to the music, once COVID-19 is over, what do you hope both the musician and the audience member realizes from this time away from live music?
What I hope is that they realize that they're missing that visceral sense that you get from being in the same room with the performers, that even though people are enjoying watching Zoom performances, and other means of watching music online, that there's something that's happening in the moment that can't be recaptured in any other way. And of course, it's a two-way street, because I know myself, and I would imagine most performers feel the same way, that the energy you get from an audience completely transforms your performance.
So, talk to me a little bit about what's the most enjoyable part of being a musician for you?
Boy, that's a really good question, and I can answer it very quickly, but it turns out to be more complex to answer. I would have to say the most enjoyable part of being a musician is performing live with other musicians. And being in a space where you can really listen closely. And once everybody is doing that, and you're really listening to the other players listen, that's when the real magic happens. But at the same time, I very much enjoy the solitude of composing completely by myself, or playing solo. But the real answer to your question is my first answer.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans. So you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
I think I'm an artist. And I think that somehow I have a vision of the shape of music. To be more specific about that, I have different visions of each piece, either when I'm composing it or improvising it. There's a scene in New York City, the free jazz scene, which I've been a part of at different periods, and there's kind of different ways people approach this. Some people just like the fact that there's no rules and they can just come and blow. Other people like the interaction with everybody's ideas. For me, it's very similar to composition in that I'd love to create a form while we're improvising with other players. And to me, that's what really expresses who I am. And I think that this is this idea of creating these forms is not just for my pleasure or benefit. It's really for the benefit and the pleasure of the listener, which I think that doing this, we transfer ideas that cannot be transferred verbally or in writing or even visually in painting. It's a different art form.
Beautiful. That's a great answer. Jack, hey, thanks for taking a minute out to talk with Neon Jazz today. Good luck with the new release. Stay safe. Especially, there's a lot of things to stay safe from, namely the hurricane and the pandemic. So, again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Joe. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Jack for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. And until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.